Well, good morning, Jeffrey and Nando. We're going to really get back in the swing of Hollywood vlogging today. Actually, we're going to get in the swing of Hollywood vlogging tonight. We're going to take Ja to the park, and then tonight I'm going to vlog something that is, well, it's kind of the reason that I live in Los Angeles. What do you think about that, guys? And Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. That's right, guys, we're headed off to Silver Lake. I'm going to let Ja play at the park. He loves this place. This is actually, even though they don't have a whole lot of grass there, it's becoming one of his favorite parks because there's always a lot of dogs there. So we're going to go hit that park, and like I said, tonight we're going to go do something that, well, it just kind of describes, and it's the reason that I ended up moving to Hollywood. It's actually about who was called, and is still called, the most dangerous band in the world. Here he goes on his way to the park. What today's topic is today is we're going to go see the filming locations for the epic Welcome to the Jungle video by Guns N' Roses. We have arrived. This guy loves it over here. Now, when I was a kid growing up, one of my main goals when I moved out here was to somehow meet every member of the band. And if you know anything about the band, you know that they pretty much all parted ways right around 1994. And I'm actually lucky enough to have gotten to meet over my time out here Slash, Duff McKagan, and if you saw the vlog 2 weeks ago, Steven Adler. Now, as you guys know, I always relate these vlogs to my life in any way that I can. So I'm gonna tell you all the instances in which I've met all the members that I've met. I haven't got to meet Izzy or Axl yet. Hopefully someday. At least I'd love to meet Axl. The reason that I want to tell you all the ways that I've gotten to meet the band is because in an odd way, they're all so rock and roll stories that they kind of meld into what we see in this music video and what they would become known for. Their crazy, kind of outlandish rock and roll, reclusive behavior. Here's the park he likes to come to. Hopefully there's a few dogs here. Pretty empty out here, but there's a few dogs. They're just kind of hanging in the shade right now. So what I'm going to do today in the video is I'm going to take us over to where I believe they filmed the concert footage, which was at the Whisky A Go-Go. And then, like I said, once the sun goes down a little bit, I'm going to take us over to where that epic video begins and ends. And I'm going to kind of tell you how this band became to be, or how they came to be, and how they became the hottest band in the world when their album, when it came out, didn't really sell very well. I'll tell you how that all changed. Just sitting here watching all the dogs come in. All right, we're heading out of here, but I did just put in a call at the Whisky A Go-Go to see if maybe they'll let me in and show you guys the interiors for this music video. And they asked me to send an email, and they're gonna run it past the owner, and they know I wanna do it today, so hopefully they'll approve it and we can show you guys what the interiors look like now for that historic venue where they filmed that music video. Okay, we're out of here, and I just fired off that email to the Whisky A Go-Go, so we'll see what happens. All right, now I'm gonna tell you how I became a Guns N' Roses fan. This goes back to 2nd grade. I was 7 years old, and there was a kid in my class who had dubbed a cassette of all of his favorite Guns N' Roses songs. I hadn't really heard them yet, but he played them on his headphones during recess, and he let me listen to it. And on that cassette, I remember he had, because he loaned it to me and I dubbed it that night, he had Paradise City, Sweet Child of Mine, Welcome to the Jungle, Patience, and I Used to Love Her. I think it was like 5 songs. And I just love this. And then shortly thereafter, the movie Lean On Me came out, and Welcome to the Jungle was in that. MTV started showing Welcome to the Jungle constantly. They started showing the Live at the Ritz, and I was just sold. So when my birthday came up, my 8th birthday came up, my grandparents always used to take me out, and they would spend $100 on whatever we wanted.
So I bought a couple of things, and I had about $10 left, which was enough to buy the Appetite for Destruction cassette. I asked my grandpa, I just said, that's what I want, and he said, we should call your mom. So he called my mom, and she actually said no. And I said, but that's all I want. That's the only thing I want. So he said, well, I'll let you talk to her. So I talked to her, and I said, that's what I want. She said, all right, you can have it. I know there's a lot of cussing on that record, but as long as you don't start cussing all over the house, then you can buy the record. So I bought it, looked through the liner notes, was blown away. The way these guys were dressed, like sitting around on this car hood, and just like everything about it. Right there when I saw that, I was like, I'm moving to Hollywood. That's where the note said that Geffen Records, Hollywood, Sunset Boulevard. I was like, that's it, that's where I'm going. Now, the very next day, a friend of mine was having a birthday party as well, and I went to it and left the cassette, like the actual artwork and the box and everything, in their car and never ever got it back. So that was the only image I had of the band for a long time, until I got my very first Guns N' Roses poster and just fell down the rabbit hole of loving Guns N' Roses. And I didn't get to see them for the first time until, oh gosh, probably 20 years later. Now here are a few of my Guns N' Roses collection t-shirts, and I'll show you some of my other favorite Guns N' Roses things. These are just classic GNR shirts for me. Now, like I mentioned, I loved Live at the Ritz, and a friend of mine actually was pretty heavily responsible for Live at the Ritz. She was a producer for that video series. I never actually knew it was a series. I just knew that that footage existed, but she said no, it was actually a series that they used to do, and she was the producer of it, and said that at the time MTV didn't want to film Guns N' Roses. She said she basically put her job on the line. They basically said, like, okay, if this isn't a success, that's it. And she said, I knew that they would be. So she said, we made a night where it was going to be Great White and Guns N' Roses, and we were going to film them together. And the night of the show, the line was like all the way around the corner, and she said it was a total success. Now, I think that's maybe one of the most interesting performances by them, because they're pretty much at their most rock and roll. You can see they're pretty drunk, they're pretty drugged out, but they're functioning, and it's kind of, I think, maybe one of those just pinnacle moments where you could just see exactly what it was that people saw in them at that time that was so rebellious, but it was just so honest. So that's what kind of made me a fan, was I didn't even know really what was going on. I just knew that this was just like unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Now, this is also one of my favorite things. It's an original issue of Appetite for Destruction with the original cover. I have been lucky enough to meet, like I mentioned earlier in the video, a couple of the members, but I've never asked them to sign it, because I've heard that if anybody has signed it before Axl, that Axl will not sign it. I'm still hoping at some point, someday, to meet him, so. Well, directly behind me is the world famous Whisky A Go-Go. And here in Welcome to the Jungle, you'll see all these great live footage clips of the band playing in front of their fans. And they decided to actually film those right here. And I'll tell you how this actually plays into me meeting the man who wore this top hat. So right here in 1987, when they filmed that first music video, Trying to Break the Band, right on the other side of this wall, this would have been the load-in door right here. The band would have been playing right here on the stage, right over here. Now like I said, I tried to contact the Whisky, and they never got back to me. I waited a few hours, they never got back to me. But the Whisky A Go-Go holds another interesting story pertaining to the band. I'll tell you that when we get across the street. So the Whisky A Go-Go would become, over that 2-year span before the band was signed and had really broke into the mainstream, this would be one of the main places that they played. And originally, before, they had lived in their rehearsal studio, but apparently the cops kept coming around, making sure that they weren't living there, stopping them. So they had a manager named Vicky Hamilton who lived right up this street, and so for about 6 months they all crashed, everybody except for Duff. It was Slash, Izzy, Steven Adler, and Axl. All were crashing there. Now, the day that they were supposed to sign their deal with Geffen Records, Vicky said all of a sudden Axl flipped out and ran out of the house because he couldn't find his contact lenses. They said that actually ended up making them an hour and a half late for signing the contract for Appetite for Destruction, And when they couldn't find him, they said Slash comes out and sees Axl sitting up in kind of a yoga pose, meditating on top of the roof. And they come out and tell him that they had found his contact lenses in a pair of pants he'd worn a few days before. And they end up going off right up the street to Geffen Records and signing their record deal. Now the way that this comes into play in my life is that years later, and I would say 1997 or 98, Spin Magazine wrote an article called Where's Axl? And it kind of accounts all these different places that Axl had been seen over the years at different movie theaters and popping up at different places and different performances. And at the time, you guys have met my friend Stefan Adika. At the time, over there where it says Rock and Riley's with the gold print and everything, that was originally the Cat Club. And at the time, Axl had popped in one day in either 1996 or 97 and got up and performed with the band, because at the time Gilby Clarke from Guns N' Roses was the front man of those nights. It was every Thursday night. So when I moved out here, one of my goals was to go to the Cat Club in the hopes that Axl would pop in one night. So when I moved here, I was underage, but my friends figured out a way to start sneaking me in, and I started going every single week. And one week we were there, the drummer of Slash's Snake Pit, Matt Log, and Slash showed up here. Slash grabbed a guitar and they played Red House. Let's go over and take a look and I'll tell you a little bit more of the story. So at the time, this was Slim Jim Phantom of the Stray Cats Cat Club. Slash came in, and it was back in the days when he was still drinking. He came in pretty drunk, started playing Red House with the band, and before I knew it, he was smoking a cigarette and his hair started catching on fire, like a couple of pieces of the front of his hair caught on fire. Now, like I said, I had always wanted to meet him, so I was bound and determined. So when he went off the stage, I immediately ran out here, and he was sitting, before this ramp was here, he was sitting right there in that very first panel where the spade is, and he was just sitting on the ground and smoking a cigarette. And I went up and introduced myself, talked to him for a while. He was actually really cool, took a picture with me. I never did get the picture because it was somebody who I was just kind of associated with at the time. It was before camera phones, and she had taken a legit picture and I never got it. But it was such an awesome experience that this was on a Thursday. 2 nights later, I was at the Rainbow down the street, and his drummer that had been here with him that night, Matt Log, showed up over there, and I said, you know, I just met you guys Thursday, da-da-da-da-da. And he said, tell you what, I'll give you a free ticket to our show at the Whisky on Friday, and you can meet Slash there, and after the show, we're gonna be at the Cat Club afterwards. So that week, I ended up coming back here, and I saw Slash perform and play guitar in front of my very eyes for the very first time with Slash's Snake Pit on his second album. They performed here, and then I came over to the Cat Club afterward and got to hang out with him after. And hopefully maybe they'll give me a call back at some point, and maybe we can come in here and we'll do a full-on Whisky A Go-Go gig, and we'll mention some other stuff. But since this was in the music video, I wanted to at least stop by and show you one of the filming locations. And then tonight we'll go over and I will show you where the video starts and ends, and I'll also tell you the story of all the different ways and different changeovers that happened for this to become the band that it was, that we all knew and loved, Guns N' Roses, featuring Izzy Stradlin, Axl Rose, Steven Adler, Duff McKagan, and Slash. Now, I'd say that's a pretty rock and roll way of meeting Slash, wouldn't you? Seeing him performing, popping up and performing Jimi Hendrix Red House, his hair catching on fire, and then what I forgot to mention was he actually had an ink pen that he had in his pocket that had a built-in lighter, and he ended up giving that to me, and I used it until it literally broke one day. When I went to flick it, the whole thing broke. But yeah, it's pretty cool. That was the way that I met Slash. Now, how I met Duff was actually just a few years ago. The day that Motley Crue announced that they were retiring, they performed on Jimmy Kimmel Live. And I used to have a friend that worked on Jimmy Kimmel, and he used to let me go to any show I wanted. I never got to see Motley Crue, so I said, hey, can I go to this show? Well, he said, sure. I went there, and in the green room before, I look over and there's a guy wearing a Seattle Seahawks hat, and I go, wait a minute, that looks like Duff. I go over, introduce myself, ended up getting to talk to him for quite a while, told him what a big influence Appetite for Destruction really was on me, and he said, let me ask you, and this is kind of funny because this is the same question that Tommy Chong asked me when I told him I was a Cheech and Chong fan from a kid. He said, so you knew all the lyrics. I said, I used to be able to perform that entire album when I was like in 3rd grade and 2nd grade when I was 7, 8 years old. And he goes, wow. He goes, let me ask you, did you know what those lyrics meant when you were singing them? And I said, no, I didn't. He goes, that's so cool, because he said, I felt the same way about Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds when I heard it. I loved that song, but I didn't know, you know, I could love it without knowing what the meaning was. So we ended up talking for quite a while there before the show even started, and then he said, I'll tell you what, man, I'll come find you later. I have to go catch up with my wife for a little bit. And so probably an hour went on, the show went on, and then we all went outside where the band was getting ready to perform. And the very first song in, as Motley Crue's performing, I feel somebody come put their arm around me, and my friend and I are standing there watching the band, and Duff McKagan comes up right between us, puts his arm around both of us, and just starts like rocking out, and I'm like, how perfect is this that the first time that I got to meet Duff McKagan was getting to watch the farewell, the first performance of the farewell tour for Motley Crue. Pretty cool experience. Now, if you're upset at me right now for not going up this street and showing you where they were crashing out at during that time period with Vicky Hamilton, it's because I have a plan for another future vlog where I'm going to go show you a lot of their crash pads, where they lived before they made it, and I'll show you the building they lived at with her. But just imagine the day that they were going to sign that deal and make go from literally living with their friends, living on the street, living off of strippers, to getting a check for, I believe it was like $37,000, and getting moved into their own rental home, which they ended up destroying. Now, they said originally the concept for the video was pretty simple. They wanted to show the band performing live, which was what they felt like was the strong suit of the band, and then they had this concept of marrying A Clockwork Orange with Midnight Cowboy. So if you're a big Guns N' Roses fan, you want to read more about them straight from the horse's mouth, you can get Slash has a book, Duff wrote a book, Steven Adler wrote a book, Mark Cantor wrote a book about the early days of the band, and Vicky, who I mentioned, Vicky Hamilton, she wrote a book called Appetite for Dysfunction. So all those books will give you a really accurate depiction of that time frame. Well, here it is, my friends. For most of us, this was the very first moment we ever saw Guns N' Roses. Right here is the very beginning of Welcome to the Jungle. This is where Axl steps off the bus right here. The hayseed comes off that bus with the backwards hat, the flannel shirt, and he's got the hay hanging out of his mouth. And Izzy is right here as the drug dealer that offers him drugs. And you see Axl start walking up this way, and we see the camera kind of flip around and see the woman's legs as Axl starts following her legs. So this is, like I mentioned earlier, basically the concept for this was Midnight Cowboy meets A Clockwork Orange. So when you see this moment, this is Indiana Axl, or I mean, I guess you could even take it back to Bill Bailey, which is his original name. When he was 17, he found out that his real dad's name was William Rose, so he changed his name to W. Axl Rose. But this is to symbolize the Indiana Axl coming out to Hollywood, meeting up with Izzy, and they have an interesting story because that's actually a true story. They were friends in Lafayette, Indiana. Izzy graduated before Axl. Axl actually never graduated, but Izzy moved out here immediately, and a few months later, Axl came out here as well. But the story has always been that Axl was actually skipping bail to do it. Now, the only way that you can match up this as being the location is by that sign. It's not the same sign, but it's the same, you can see it's the same address. It's the 5400 West block of 6th Street. So you can tell that the font is different in there. The pole that it was on is even different. The bench itself is different. And in fact, you would have had parking meters going right along here in the video that are no longer there, but even those would have been different because now they're all like decibeled parking meters. But that was a true story. Like I said, those guys were friends in Indiana. Axl came out here and started looking for Izzy. It took him a few months to find him, and once he did, they started playing out. They got a little band together and they started playing out as Rose. Now this was kind of important because this was really a foundation for a songwriting team. I would liken this to the talent of like Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, because Izzy is often underappreciated as a member of Guns N' Roses, but he was one of the primary songwriters. He had a very Thin Lizzy and Rolling Stones kind of style to his writing, and you can hear it in the first two albums, definitely. So those two started writing together, and Rose was out performing, and one night, two friends that had been friends since like junior high, Steven Adler and Slash, they had a band at that time called Road Crew. Now those two guys, in junior high, the story was that Steven Adler had a guitar, invited Slash over. He saw the guitar, started messing around with it, and Steven showed him how to play a few chords, and Slash got hooked and basically kept the guitar and kept playing it. So those guys have been friends since they were, you know, pre-teens. And they had a band called Road Crew that also had Duff. Duff was from Seattle and had moved down to Los Angeles to try and make it in music. So they started a band called Road Crew. They went out, they saw Rose, and said, we have to have this singer and this guitar player. So they asked Izzy and Axl to join the band, and the band then became Hollywood Rose. Now oddly enough, that was basically Guns N' Roses, but that lineup of Hollywood Rose didn't work out. So Axl left and joined LA Guns with like a 17-year-old Tracy Guns, who went on to have his own fame with LA Guns. They started performing and they needed a bass player, so they asked Duff to come join the band, and eventually asked Izzy to join the band, and they changed the name to Guns N' Roses. So at this point, the band consisted of Guns N' Roses with Axl Rose headlining. As frontman, you had Duff McKagan, Izzy Stradlin, Tracy Guns, and Richard Gardner playing drums. Now, Duff managed to put together a tour, and they were going to go up to Seattle and play a few dates up in this tour, and apparently Tracy and Richard, the drummer, didn't want to go on the tour, but the other guys really were dead set on going, so they asked Slash and Steven Adler to join the band to fill in. They went and did this road trip. Their car broke down on the way. They had to end up hitchhiking like 1,000 miles, and apparently through all that they bonded as like a gang of brothers and were pretty much inseparable, which is what a lot of people said really is what showed on stage when you saw them perform. Now along with this went a lot of drinking and a lot of drugs, but what was said by everybody that knew them was that like none of the labels wanted to touch them because they didn't want to put up with them. They thought they were going to be way too much work and way too much hassle, but there was this chemistry that even though they could be like completely out on heroin or drinking or drunk, whatever, they could still pull it together and perform extremely well. So now I'm going to take you guys over to the only other part that I can show you for this music video, and I'll tell you a little bit more of the story and some of the events of that day, and one band member that they tended to have a lot of problems with on this music video shoot. No, not part of the music video, just a cool window display. Now the next scene that we see over here on this street is actually right here. This is where all the TVs were kind of piled up that showed Axl in the Clockwork Orange scene where he's strapped to the chair and his head was shaking and everything, and Slash is actually laying down here. Now there were supposed to be other scenes in this music video starring Slash, but apparently from what I read, interviews with their old manager, he was a bit of a problem on this set. They said that there was supposed to be a scene with a car that they rented, however on the day before they shot this, Slash had stolen the car and taken off in it. So the next day when they came to film this day, right here on La Brea, they said that the manager had a talk with everybody and said, look, no drinking on this set, no more drinking during this photo shoot, nothing at all, you hear me, you got what I'm saying? And Slash immediately replied, give me a beer. They said at one point he got bored and just started wandering out through La Brea and started freaking people out. He had like a big bottle of Jack Daniels, just walking out, wandering through traffic. And then when they reprimanded him for that and said, you know, you can't behave like that, that's completely unacceptable, he just started walking like 5-6 miles home. Never came back. So this was his scene, but this is also the very last scene in the music video, because like I mentioned, you have that transformation. The whole video is showing Axl's transformation from being like Lafayette, Indiana, Bill Bailey to W. Axl Rose of Hollywood of Guns N' Roses. You see the transformation, and his hair's all teased up and he's got makeup on and everything, and he's standing right here, profile to us right here, watching those TVs. And the way that you can tell that this is the same building is if you look past the barriers, you can see these bars that divide it. There's that black bar and then the black bar for this, like, it's almost like an angled window. You can see that in the music video, so you would have seen all the TVs lined up, kind of staggered right there. Think back, now this was like 1987, so this music video was, it was supposed to, or should have, broke the band, but MTV didn't want to play it. MTV refused to play it. In fact, David Geffen himself had to, after like the album had been out for 6 months, it was kind of basically tanking for their standards. I think it only sold like 200,000 copies. He called MTV and basically begged them to show it, and they said, okay, we'll show it at 6 a.m. Eastern time on like a Sunday night going into Monday. And they showed it, and their boards lit up, and Guns N' Roses took off from there. Now, unfortunately, the band continued to drink and abuse drugs, and in their heyday in like 1988, 89, they were out touring. It really got out of control where guys were passing out all the time. And I guess basically everybody but Axl really had a pretty big problem. And when they went in to start recording, or it's just been reported that Steven Adler just couldn't play the drums for those parts, so they ended up asking him to leave. He was the first one to leave. They recorded the albums, and then Izzy Stradlin decided to leave as well. And Izzy never really cared for the spotlight, never really needed any of that, and has never returned. Even when they negotiated to have the whole band come back, Steven wasn't asked. Maybe it's because he had had a back surgery recently, or just he had had strokes in the past, or his you know, maybe just unreliable. But Izzy refused to come back because he said he would only come back if all the members were paid equally, and Axl didn't want to do that, which, I mean, I guess I can kind of understand. You know, Kiss does the same thing where they feel like, you know, we've never left, Gene and Paul say, like, we've never left the band, so we shouldn't divide it equally. And Axl has carried the band throughout all those years when there was nothing released. He was taking all the abuse. He was also you know, scrutinizing over everything, and basically the band name could have completely died with him at the helms, but it didn't. It actually, the band's probably bigger now than ever, and I actually liked Chinese Democracy when it came out. That was the long-awaited album. A lot of people compared it to the original stuff, but I just don't think that you can compare an album 20 years later to a time period where the people who were making the music had a different life. I think you have to just judge it for what it is. And now Axl has gotten his original vocal teacher back that he had during the original days of Appetite for Destruction, and his voice is stronger than ever. It really sounds great. If you ever go check him out in concert, it's really worth seeing, in my opinion. So our opening shot of Axl getting off the bus would have taken place right over here on this corner, and then just diagonal right over here where this vintage clothing store is now is where the TVs, and we would have seen Slash laid out right there, as well as an ending shot of Axl watching the TVs in disbelief and shaking his head right here. Pretty cool, man. Like I said, I idolize these guys. Probably not the best group of guys to idolize, but it just, you know, even to this day when I hear Appetite for Destruction, the adrenaline that pumps through me is unlike any other album that I ever listened to. It's an album where there's not one bad song, and every song has its own attitude, its own feeling, and you can just, I mean, to me, it's just one of those perfect records. Now, the only shots from the music video that we couldn't do today were obviously inside the Whisky because they didn't get back to me. But inside that room, basically there's a shot where Steven Adler is with a girl, and Izzy and Slash and everybody are kind of like lingering around, just noodling on guitars in a small little apartment. I don't know where that was. And then those scenes of Axl being strapped to the chair watching the Daily News and everything. Obviously that was probably on a soundstage somewhere, but we got to see everything else, which I think is pretty cool for a monumental video for a band that broke out of like a complete hair metal scene here with just full-on leather attitude, man. Such a great band. So if you're watching this video in the distant future and you're wondering how did you meet Steven Adler, or maybe you don't care at all, but I'm going to tell you anyway. 2 weeks ago, before this video that you're watching, I made a video called James Dean's Lost Goggles and Stefan's Rock and Roll Wedding, and Steven Adler was at that wedding. I interviewed him on that video, and Stefan, whose wedding it was the bass player at the Cat Club when I was going, hoping that Axl would pop in. So it's kind of funny how that whole circle of friends from almost 20 years ago has all kind of linked up after all these years. Pretty crazy. Well, Mr. Axl Rose, if you'd ever like to be on the vlog, feel free to hit me up. Otherwise, we're gonna call it a night over here. Well, that's it, my friends. I know some people will think that this video is way longer than it needed to be, but this is my favorite band, and I wanted to share every reason why I love them with you guys. And if you didn't know anything about Guns N' Roses, I hope that was a crash course in their history for you. Wanted to thank Ginger Hebert for becoming my newest Patreon. And when I stopped over at Tailwaggers earlier, they presented me with 3 different gift cards from various people that had been to Los Angeles over the last 2 weeks when I've been all over the map. And they said that now apparently everybody in Tailwaggers knows about this vlog because you've all been stopping in wanting to meet Ja and leaving gift cards. So that was so nice of all of you. They didn't have names on all of them, but thank you all so much. We did get them. And yeah, now Ja's a celebrity. They're going to have to ask for like a signed photo of Ja for Tailwaggers. I even told him, I said, hey, go check. I did a vlog on the history of Tailwaggers. If you don't know the history of it and you work here, you can find out about it. So have a great night, y'all. Hope you guys enjoyed this vlog. Go listen to Appetite for Destruction and rock out. Have a good night. Goodbye.